Well, welcome everyone. I'm excited to be presenting providing aged care advice as a policy for Shartru, and I'm also excited to finally have Sam Geelan with us, who's an aged care expert within our network. So without further ado, let's carry on. Okay, so this is the agenda. It's a fairly, I suppose, lengthy agenda. I just want to discuss the policy, the responsibility, ASIC's position, what advice that requires an AFSL, that requires a credit license, a little talk about reverse mortgages, life interest or life tenancy arrangements, what additional obligations we at Shartru impose, referrals to an aged care specialist, vulnerable clients and elder abuse. Now, we have had something previously on this, but this is something I thought it's just sort of fitted in, so we'll go through that. Who are vulnerable clients, where to go for help, and then Sam has kindly given us a couple of examples or case studies, one on elder abuse, one on an advice review, and then, of course, there's questions at the end. Okay, so the policy. Now, aged care advice means advice provided to clients 55 years or over, clients of any age who are requiring palliative care at home or in residential aged care settings, any client, any age with an impairment level requiring support. So NDIS is probably, I suppose, what you'd call a fairly common area these days. Responsibility. So Shartru, we're here to make sure, you provide the advice you're supposed to, things like that. What we'd like to happen is obtain separate qualifications as approved by Shartru through the Aged Care Steps program, and you're going to find out why as I go through this policy. Use the accredited software where possible. And if you're not accredited, at the moment, we have 2 people in our network. Now, there may be others who haven't let me know, but if you are, please let me know. And that's Empower Aged Care Strategic Advice, which is Samantha Geelan, who we have today, and then Financial Management SA, which is Andrew Nusky. He's recently joined us. He's in South Australia. So what is ASIC's position on aged care? Obviously, retirees have to rely on superannuation or other investments and have less time to recover. We all know that from negative returns, risks of outliving their retirement. So these are things we all have with retirees. Sometimes their expectations don't correspond with the income they can get. Some older Australians may be financially more vulnerable due to low retirement savings or low super balances. Just remembering that superannuation for a lot of people is only a recent tool from about the 90s, I suppose. There's also things like divorce, death of a partner. Older people can also be particularly vulnerable to certain types of financial scams and victims of financial abuse or exploitation by friends or family. And some financial products just hold particular risk for older people as they are less able to recover from. There are also higher risk products specifically targeted older Australians who may be concerned about the adequacy of their retirement savings and therefore more vulnerable to schemes to claim, to address this. So that's sort of where ASIC's sort of expecting us as advisors to look out for the older person. Aged care advice that requires an AFSL. So I suppose you could say that actions that do not require an AFSL is sort of pretty well down the left-hand side, and the right-hand side tells you what does require licensing. So you can discuss options around own home, retirement village, hostel, residential aged care, but you need to know about these things, ownership structures, and then you get into some of the stuff that I just wouldn't even attempt myself, assessing entry costs and payment options. I'm not in that area. I don't keep up to it. And that's one of the reasons we think that you should use a specialist. Certainly from advice side, there's, some of the investments. Obviously, you can't give direct property advice, superannuation advice, things like that, some of the other considerations that you can have. The advice that requires a credit license is reverse mortgage, and clients can be directed to use the ASIC's Money website and reverse mortgage calculator. Now, that allows them to simulate what scenarios and allows clients to see the growth of the loan amount in comparison to the home value over a period of time. But the calculator, of course, is only as good as the inputs, and an overly optimistic growth figure for the property or unrealistic interest rate is going to sort of skew the results. And you got to think about what's their health and living situation. Is there de facto spouses? Is it a second marriage? Reduction in equity to the beneficiaries. It may affect government entitlements. There can be unintended consequences for aged care entry. Obviously, it's repaid on death. If you've got an adult child living with them, what happens to them? One of the dangers I've got there is keeping secrets. And I think this is where, as an advisor, you'd want to be very careful where they say, oh, don't tell my son or don't tell anyone I'm going to do this. Because obviously, when they come to die, you're going to have their son or daughter looking at you to say, why did you help them do this? And then the other thing I think we've got to look at is the maintenance of the property, because if the property is not maintained, then the value may not be there. So these are just some of the things that have got to be considered. But with all these thoughts in mind, any discussion on reverse mortgages needs to be fully file noted, including a recommendation for the client to seek legal advice prior to entering any contract. It should be clear that no way has the advisor recommended or encouraged the client to enter an arrangement. If anything, we should be dissuading clients from entering a reverse mortgage. Reference should be made in a subsequent SOA or email, or if no advice is given, that you have had a discussion with the client about a reverse mortgage. Shartru Wealth does not give advice on reverse mortgages. However, you recommend the client do their research on the ASIC Money Smart website, seek advice from a credit license holder, and discuss with the family, and be very cautious in entering such arrangements, thinking through all the likely consequences, as they usually fairly hard to unwind should they change their mind. And I know there's groups out there that are trying to encourage people to go into this. And I think really, I know when we talk to Sam a bit later, she'll probably tell you that, yeah, there's probably unintended consequences there. The other common thing you might see, of course, is a life interest or life tenancy arrangement. And sometimes that comes about with a blended family, or it's quite a common situation even to have, second wife, third wife, or in my case, yes, I'm the second wife, but I'm the third husband, as I say. So, yeah. No matter the circumstances, there's often a desire to look after the second spouse or adult children by creating a life interest or a life tenancy arrangement with the property. So that sort of means that, the second spouse can live in the house until, they die or something, and then goes to the children or whatever. However, like granny flat rights, life interests are usually family arrangements which usually arise when a person receives the right of the asset or a life interest or life tenancy to income, but ownership is given to another person or transfers an assessable asset to another person, but retains interest in the asset or receives life interest in an asset through the will of another person. So subject to the contractual arrangements that established the life interest, it remains in place until the person dies, sells the asset, or formally surrenders the asset. So if the person transfers or money for a right to reside in a property owned by another person, that transaction normally is assessed under the granny flat rules. So normally life interest is created where, I suppose, outside of this. So how life interests are treated by Centrelink and DVA and others is a subject all on its own, and we're not going to address it in the policy. Suffice to say that an aged care specialist can help you navigate through those matters, especially if the person having the life interest subsequently needs to move into aged care. If you have a client thinking of this, speak to an aged care specialist first. There are many variations of the treatment depending on how the life interest was created in the first place. We're also of the understanding that in New South Wales, that a life interest in a property could have land tax implications. As I just say, another reminder why you should seek out the help of someone like Sam or Andrew. Okay, what do we sort of impose ourselves? Well, as a licensee, we need to manage the risks associated with providing different types of advice. While not all aged care advice requires a license, we require you to provide all aged care advice in the following manner. Aged care advice is a specialist area, and hopefully some of the topics in this policy will make you realise that it needs meticulous and careful planning. And can I say that I've seen the work of Sam, and I just think that everyone would be able to follow it if you see how much she has to go to cover herself. And it's not something I think you can do part-time. The possibility of getting it wrong is so easy if you've not got the accreditation. And if you do think you want to get into this, we're not stopping you from getting accredited through the aged care steps information. The information can be found there, and you can get the training and pay the money for the course and become accredited. But I will say to you that I don't believe it's something you can do as a sideline. If you want to refer to an aged care specialist, you may call upon to help your client engage with them properly. Obviously, make contact with Sam or Andrew. Provide permission to share maybe on Xplan or AI the contact details. There are some important documents that the aged care advisor will require and be looking for. And Shartru Wealth Compliance suggests you have a referral form in place that allows the client to give you permission to pass on any financial information and other details to the aged care advisor. And obviously, you've got to go through to the clients have enduring powers of attorney in place, do the clients have guardianship form, current will, copy of the latest F&A, and do the clients have an ACAT assessment? Now, one of the things I suppose we talk about is vulnerable clients and elder abuse. And probably in this area is where you're going to see some signs, and you should be looking out for some of these signs. And we need to manage the risks associated with providing advice to all our clients. And we're hoping that you as an advisor will be able to identify some of these things. But you also need to be cautious about giving general advice. Advisors need to be careful when providing general advice to vulnerable clients. So while a person's individual objectives, financial situation and needs are not considered in giving general advice, the test for personal advice is whether a reasonable person might expect you to have considered these matters. Providing advice to vulnerable clients where you do not adequately consider their circumstances could result in any advice provided being considered a breach of the best interest duties and unconscionable. Vulnerable clients are likely to act on anything you say despite your warnings. This is general advice. And part of the reason is, if you think about it, if they're vulnerable, they're being bullied, they're looking for help, anything you say could be, for them, turned to some form of advice. So just be cautious. So who are vulnerable clients? Well, some of these obviously elderly, suffering age-related impairment, cognitive impairment, obviously if they're suffering from elder or financial abuse, experiencing family or domestic violence, experiencing specific life events, including divorce, job loss, accident, illness, having a baby, suffering from mental or other forms of serious illness, any other personal or financial circumstances, and there can be some sort of vulnerability caused by living in rural or remote areas, or where English is not their first language, or unable to readily produce standard identification documents. So basically, you know, it can be anyone, but obviously it tends to be in the older, well, some of it can be in the older generation. Where can you go for help? Well, there is the elder abuse line, and got some details there. There are some links there for New South Wales, Queensland and Victoria. And we did have a session probably a year ago now about protecting seniors' wealth with Anne McGowan. They offer training and education to advisors who want to learn more about elder abuse. They also have a resource library of books and guides you can buy, giving guidelines, facts, plans of actions when dealing with them. And I've given you the website there. Now, I'd like to hand over to Sam.
Thank you very much, Steve, for the introduction. Greatly appreciated. Been asked to provide just some general examples of what we cover when we're looking at aged care advice. It's not just strategic when we're looking at cash flows, how to fund. It is actually a holistic point of view. It can be covered in a lot of client circumstances. Elder abuse is something that is of great importance, and protecting your clients, their parents, and anyone that's in a vulnerable state is of great importance from an ethical and also a moral point of view. It's also best practice from a business. This case is one of many examples, unfortunately, that we come across. We receive a lot of referrals from providers, home care providers, aged care facilities, solicitors, lawyers, and financial advisors. Because as Steve said, if you're going to do something, you've got to 100% focus on it. I've only been doing aged care specific strategic advice for the last 10 to 12 years, and I've been licensed since 2004. Prior to that, I actually worked in the finance industry, doing mortgage broking, lending, and finance for 8 years during that period as well. I worked within an accounting firm as an advisor for 15 years. So when I'm looking at tax planning and those sorts of aspects, I've absorbed that information through there as well. In all circumstances, you are never going to know everything, and you cannot do everything for a client. All you can do is recognise there's a need and forward those requirements onto the specialists. So when I'm doing anything, I collaborate with lawyers, taxation advisors, with Services Australia, with any experts that's required depending on the client's circumstance. You don't know until we actually ask the questions. Now, this sort of example is one that is very relevant. It's very easy to see how difficult it can be to recognise different variants of elder abuse. In this particular case, the client that came in, they were actually worried about their partner who was entering into aged care. And as you can see from the scenario, the partner was in hospital, had been diagnosed as palliative, 2 to 4 months. Their local hospital, which was more rural, had actually offered to take them for the entire period of time with no impact. Yet the children of the client, who was diagnosed with the terminal illness, was pushing for it to be transferred to an aged care facility. Both of the clients have no loss of capacity from a cognitive point of view. Now, that's really important to understand as well. Please don't assume because an individual is older that they do not have the capacity to have their own decisions, their own goals and objectives, and to be able to have any of their requirements met. We recently had a 98-year-old ex-lawyer who updated their legal documents without any issues at all. Impairment is something that should be diagnosed by a medical practitioner and geriatrician, not us. So on that basis, when we met with the individual, they ran through the details. They were of the opinion that they were going to be forced to sell their home, which was owned and purchased by themselves. As you can see, there's quite a few issues ongoing of potential abuse. Financial, coercive control. It also unfortunately extended to the belief from the children of the client that was palliative that they had the right to also intimidate the other partner to try and have a property transferred to them below market value. Now, unfortunately, because it had been a historic situation where there was control involved, the individual actually felt that this might be something that they needed to do. Fortunately, the children were able to bring this individual in to be able to seek a little bit of information and advice, collaborating with a lawyer to confirm that no, under no circumstances should someone be coerced into signing over their property to a third party. This is not a marital issue. This was actually going to be handled by an estate. So again, it's just having the details and having the information to recognise that there's an issue and to be able to provide guidance and support to individuals to refer them to be able to seek any, I guess, guarantee confirmation and whom is available to assist them. Now, as you'd be aware, a lot of these circumstances, as noted on the previous page, this could be a legal issue. Police can be involved. It's not actually documented to be legislated yet for coercive control anywhere apart from Tasmania. But with financial abuse, that is something that can be pursued, especially when an individual has capacity. No one should feel intimidated, coerced or intimidated when they're that age. It's just not right anytime. So in that circumstance, this gives you an idea as to how easily these sorts of things can happen. And it's something as simple as being able to provide support and reassurance to an individual. In this case, don't sign anything. Request for support from your family. You're not alone. Seek advice if you need it. So that individual and the family felt a lot reassured, same as referrals through to the relevant providers, police, and also lawyers. Same thing here. This was another example of a client that was referred through from a third-party home care provider, as they had actually recognised there was issues, and it was mainly unrelated issues which brought them in. When we had a look at the situation and reviewed it, we have two individuals, one which had actually entered into residential aged care back in 2016. Now, those who have been at any involvement with aged care would understand that it's an evolving beast, and basically every quarter, if not sooner, the rules change, amounts change, thresholds changed. There were big changes that occurred back 2014, 15, 16. Now in that, this client would have actually been covered under those rules. They received advice back in 2016 from an advisor. We won't mention the name. In that circumstance, the affiliated advisor provided them with written advice to state that they should retain the upfront accommodation payment outstanding at an interest rate of 6.24%. Now, in those circumstances, they also then went along to recommend that the money, which was in excess $700,000, should be actually invested in their affiliated products. There was 8 in total. Now, on those circumstances, just looking at it from a general point of view, we can see ethically, morally, and everything else, there's issues that are involved in there that need to be reviewed from a high level. One of the other aspects that we're looking at is also saying back then you could negotiate bond amounts. So it wasn't a fixed bond, you could actually pay higher amounts. So when I'm talking about the potential loss of age pension entitlement for at least a 6-year period, which is what we're looking at now historically, is quite easily validated. Now, you can see that that amount provides for quite a substantial loss, financial loss. You've got $240,000 minimum that you would be looking at from an age pension entitlement, an interest cost of $144,000 minimum, with still maintaining the strategy that was available back at that time by having a partial amount of bond outstanding, retaining an exemption on the former home. Now, those sorts of things, we're not even taking into account reviewing the investments that were held, the advice fees that were charged on each product, 8 of them, over that 6-year period. From an ethical standpoint, it's hard to comprehend how the advisor at that particular point in time was able to justify. When I did inquire, the clients both had cognitive capacity. There was no diagnosed reason from a medical point of view why they could not make their own decisions. Both children who are powers of attorney were also involved in the meetings with the financial advisor. For all those purposes, we can see how concerning that sort of thing is and how easy these unfortunate situations can occur. It is really important to have a complex understanding when we're doing these things. As you can see, financially, there should be the ability for compensation should the client choose to pursue it. This example gives you an understanding of all the other complexities that can come into an equation. You've got mediation, you've got family history, you've got all those sorts of things which can cause significant documentation complexities and details when you're dealing with clients. There is several different documentations of abuse in this circumstance. There's carer burnout, there's carer fatigue, there's risks abound which can be managed and can be referred for the best interest of all parties to get the outcome for the clients and their family, which is basically why we do what we do, to be able to help.
Well, thanks, Sam. I think both those cases, I mean, that's pretty sobering to think there. I'm just looking there, 240,000, 144,000, nearly $400,000 straight up mistake there straight away. Yeah, but that definitely, I think, just illustrates why I say that this is not for a part-time job and why it's sort of a full-time thing. But if you want to pursue this, it's certainly you can do the study, but if not, that's what Sam's there for. And I know Rob and Clint have used Sam a few times, and I think Jeff John has as well. So there's plenty of scope to help your clients. You don't need to do it. Anyway, that's the end. We've got some questions, and we'll throw it open to questions.